In this video, we're going to be figuring out or learning how to sketch the graph of a polynomial function. So we're going to do that with an example, and here we have the function f of x equals negative 2x to the third plus 6x squared minus 9 over 2x. So the first thing we want to do is decide what is our leading coefficient and what is our degree. So our a value, or our leading coefficient, is a equals negative 2. And our degree is going to be this number up here, right? That number right there. And so that should be a 3. So we have our degree of 3. Now we want to solve, and we need to get what our zeros are, our x's. And so to do that, for me, it's a little bit easier to get rid of that fraction, that 9/2. So in order to do that, we're going to multiply everything by 2 there. Now the reason I chose 2 is because the denominator of 9 over 2 is a 2. And so by doing that, it allows those to simply cross out. All right, so now let's write down what that gives us. So that gives us 0 equals negative 4x to the third plus 12x squared minus 9x. Now from here, we're going to factor out a negative x, because each thing had an x, and since our leading coefficient was negative, we took that out. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to factor the 4x squared minus 12x plus 9, because that does factor. Now if it didn't factor, then I could have used the quadratic equation, and that would have given me my zeros as well. Now from here, because the 2x minus 3, there's 2 of those, I only have to write it down once. So I'm going to use the zero product property. And so that's going to give me an x equals 3/2, and that's for the 2x minus 3. And then x equals 0, because negative x equal to 0 is x equals 0. So to start our sketch, we're going to actually graph those 2 points. So we're going to graph x is 0, and we're going to graph x equals 3/2. So there we go. We have our 2 points. Now to figure out what the rest of the graph looks like, we need to pick points around these. So we want a point that is bigger than 3/2, something that is between 0 and 3/2, and something that is larger than 3/2. Or sorry, smaller than 0, in between 0 and 3/2, and then larger than 3/2. So we're going to make a table. All right, so here we have our table. And so let's start with a number that's smaller than 0. And the number that's easy to do that with is negative 1. So now a number between 0 and 3/2. Well, a positive 1 is between those, so that makes it kind of easy. And then a number that's bigger than 3/2 is the number 2. So now we want to take each of these values and we want to plug them back in and see what we get. So we're going to plug them in up here and we're going to see what we get. So you should use your calculator to do that, to plug that in. And we should get a 25 over 2, which is a 12.5. When we plug in the 1, that gives us a negative 1/2. And when we plug in the 2, that gives us a negative 1. So here we see that we're going to have a positive portion, a negative portion, and then a negative portion. And so kind of like, well, what is that going to look like, right, as we go to graph it? So we're saying that when we're on the left side of 0, our graph's going to go up. When we're on the right side of 3/2, it's going to go down. And in between that, it's negative. So when we go to make this graph, it's going to be negative. We want something like this between the two, because it's supposed to be negative, but it curves under there to get there. And then it's coming up. And then, so it's touching it, and then it's coming back down. And one of the reasons we knew that it wasn't going to cross at the 3/2 is because the 3/2, the 2x minus 3, there was 2 of those, right? So we knew it was just going to touch and turn. And so here we now have a sketch of our polynomial function. So that's pretty simple to do, to get that little sketch.